Since the release of Natlan, the community has never been more fractured on the version's overall performance, atmosphere, character, story, and whatnot. One side of the player base has been condemning Hoyo over prioritizing marketability or gimmicks over proper character design and cohesion, while the other faction has argued their more cavalier actions have some merit to it. Regardless of what stance you take, one thing remains absolutely certain. Genshin's characters feel and look a lot different than what players are used to. At least, that's how Natlan and by extension version 5 feels to me in general. It's not the Genshin Impact I remember playing all these years, for better or worse. The characters in particular are where I see it the most. As much as I'm happy that units like Shilonen and Zolali breathe new life into their respective elements, as well as more 4-star characters who can find great usage in the metagame like Auroran and Lanyan, something is just off about version 5. A lot of things feel off. So today, I want to give my honest thoughts about Genshin's character design philosophy as of late, and how I believe the game has begun to lose its direction in that respect. While we're talking about character design, if you're interested in finding some more normal looking characters, why not check out Tribe 9, our sponsor for today. Chances are you guys saw other gacha tubers like Brax, Iwin, and Gacha Gamer cover this video a few months back. Well, they just released their 1.0 version a few days ago, so definitely check it out. Tribe 9 is a free-to-play extreme action RPG set in a death game setting in a future dystopian Tokyo. Seeing as it's in the future, the landscape and environment are also really far off compared to your typical fantasy gachas, so if you're not much of an isekai person, this could be right up your alley. It's a very story-focused game with a lot of mystery and world building to it, and a ton of characters each with their own quirks and tendencies. From the side of gameplay, you get to explore the city to engage in 3-man party encounters with a variety of enemies in full 3D action battles. Speaking of battles, they have an avoid and parry system that lets you dodge attacks and create big openings for counterattacks, making it a very mechanics-based game. And the tension system comprises a core essence of combat, wherein you can utilize different cards to gain buffs and empower your team. There's a ton of character customization and built-in flexibility in this game, so if you're interested in checking it out, you can use my QR code on screen or link in the description below to register. Thanks again to Akatsuki Games for sponsoring the video, but for now, back to Genshin's character design. Let's get one thing straight, this isn't a discussion on power creep, not entirely anyway, I've done plenty of those already. This is more of a discussion on Genshin's characters in general. From a power point of view, I'd argue Natlan is one of the more successful to date. So far we haven't had a release that's DL levels of offensive, and the 4 stars, save Gachina, have been quite impressive. Even Gachina, despite her lackluster personal kit, gets to ride the coattails of being a Night Soul user to run schools in the city, making her at worst a serviceable unit. As well, the 5 stars have all been decent or top tier. Even the new standard character Mizuki has room for meta relevance, notably if you get her C2 from losing enough 50/50s. They've made sure every unit released in version 5 has been relevant in some shape or form. Yet despite the average performance of Natlan being noticeably higher than its predecessors, player sentiment towards characters has been much more contentious. Whether it's because of the fact that every new unit feels like they're pushing the needle on the game's power ceiling, or because of other factors, things are just weird now. For example, while everyone is aware of how strong Mavuika is, I've seen many more comments on people planning to skip her, or skip Chaska, or Kanish, or Milani, despite all 4 of them being among the best attackers in the game in one aspect or another. Obviously, it's more than a singular reason. Every player has their own motivations for why they play Genshin and why they do or don't pull for units. But if I were to summarize how I personally think about version 5's units, now that we're a good ways into it, apologies if this might be a heated statement, but they don't feel like Genshin Impact characters. In fact, the entirety of Natlan doesn't feel like Genshin Impact to me, and it's getting progressively harder to ignore at this point. I was already raising an eyebrow when I found out Shilonen, a craftswoman, happens to strut around in booty jean shorts, roller skates, and modern DJ equipment, and then it got even weirder when Chaska came out and I found she mounts a literal floating gun. Then I saw Mavuika with her ostentatious motorcycle, and even Zolali riding a floating sentient pillow, which, while insanely adorable, comes off incredibly out of place in a game like Genshin. Visually striking and attention-grabbing designs for sure, not to mention how over-the-top their animations are in-game, but forgive me if I'm in the minority for saying this. I feel like Hoyo has been more concerned with making characters that look appealing or pander to the gacha audience more than characters that flesh out their region or add more to the world of Teyvat. My sentiments towards that only exacerbated when I saw Mizuki and Veresa. To Mizuki's credit, her design isn't exactly unheard of even in fantastical Japanese culture. I saw a few people calling her gooner bait for guys with a thing for maid outfits, but colors and dream mist and stuff aside, the Okubo sandals, obi around her waist, detached sleeves, and kimono-inspired outfit are all relatively traditional Japanese clothing. It's not like Mizuki strutting around Inazuma looking like March 7. A big reason for that though has to do with Inazuma having an established identity in design and structure compared to Natlan. Another example would be Lanyan. I found her design to be refreshing amidst all the Natlan units we had for still being synchronous to Liyue's aesthetic, but once again that's due to Liyue having an established theme to it. Natlan on the other hand doesn't really have one, or at least not one that Hoyo appears to want to follow. The landscape and style of the region is very much inspired by Meso and South American culture, with I believe a bit of West Africa. Yet if you were to line up every Natlan character we have so far and show them to a person who's only ever seen Genshin Impact in mainstream social media and advertising, they would have no idea what kind of region they're depicting, or even if they're part of Genshin Impact to begin with. And who could blame them? Mavuika and Kanish look like they can be more Zenless Zone Zero characters than Genshin ones. Solali and Varesa look like they belong to a waifu gacha. On that note, there's been a lot of discourse around people comparing ZZZ to Genshin, how players seemingly have no problem with ZZZ being glorified Gunnar bait while taking issue with Genshin's, especially with, the whole mixed bad thing. It's about intent and direction. The reason people are fine with games like Azure Lane, ZZZ, Nikke, Blue Archive, Snowbreak Containment, and other waifu games is because they market themselves as just that. Waifu games. Some, bit more than others and a bit more lasciviously, but the point still stands. If you have a game of all girl characters, or a lot of girl characters, and a ton of skins with a focus on visual appeal, then fan service like for example Jane Doe getting all frisky is expected from the game. Keyword expected. Genshin was never like that. Sure, many of its units have bubbly, cutesy anime aesthetics even back from day one. No one's gonna look at Ganyu or Mona and think there was zero fan service in place, but that was not their marketing strategy. In fact, Hoyo themselves drew no attention to things like that. The first thing many people think of with Ganyu is how she choked a giant monster to death for trying to eat her alive. People memed on Raiden Shogun for the Booba sword, but most people don't see her as just that. She was marketed to us in a very serious, solemn, and tragic manner. The few moments of whimsy we saw of her were overshadowed by the amount of dark themes of her being a dick to everyone until we showed her the power of friendship. It's all about what you choose to focus on. If you focus on X thing for years and years, people will be conditioned to expect X thing, which makes it all the more off-putting when you suddenly shift gears to Y thing. So Lali and Varesa, do these girls look like they're part of a supposed war-torn tribal South/Mesoamerican inspired country? So Lali, despite being a well-respected shaman and having a day job, is characterized as a closet weeb. I can get why she's doing this, owing to her cursive immortality, but her light novel binge hobby is less of a cute Easter egg that you come across while getting to know her, and more of the thing Hoyo wants people to know her for. Take a look at her character trailer. They had a clear intent of how they wanted to portray her. Same with Varesa, we only have her drip marketing, but from just that alone, from the super tiny booty skirt to thighs that are bigger than her head to hearts on her boots and all that, they're trying to portray her in a certain way. It's all about portrayal. Now, characters can have quirky tendencies and gap-moe things to them that may subvert character expectations, but so long as they're congruent with the quote-unquote vibe of where they belong to, that's fine. Who tells a funeral parlor director who likes to tell morbid jokes, pull pranks, be kind of creepy, and generally act like she doesn't have a care in the world? But we could tell she takes her job very seriously right from the get-go during the story quest, and even during the recent Lantern Rite event. People knew she was a derp, but that didn't overshadow the respect she had for her role, even in character with the most unusual design back then, Kokomi. Personally, when I saw her back in version 2, I thought she was Hoyo trying to focus on adorableness and pastel colors and such, but in her character teaser and demo, we see her portrayed in a more somber, pensive light. She's extremely cute and pretty, but the focus is on her role as the de facto leader of Watatsumi and the responsibility that goes along with it. That's where the disconnect comes from. Do I think every character needs to have a serious portrayal or a tragic backstory? No, but if the surrounding context demands it, then let it be so. Xiangling's allowed to be a goofy-go-lucky character because she's a side character her surrounding context allows her to be. She's a normal teenage girl with a penchant for cooking who serendipitously happened to stumble upon a sleeping bear who's the god of cooking, and then they became best friends forever. Conversely, is it appropriate for a centuries-old Archon who's gone through a lot of shit to have their trailer video show them singing in a rock band concert? Okay, maybe Mavuika is not the best example. I've listened to enough Linkin Park to know that depression leads to some pretty good music. The focus of these trailers has become less about showing us more of the character and more about being appealing, making us zero in more on that aspect instead of what they're really about. That's why there was such a divisive reception towards Mavuika. Half the people were calling her a Mary Sue who doesn't even look like an Archon, while the other half were applauding her tragic backstory and what she had to give up to protect her people and her nation. Hoyo is trying to maintain the serious nature they wanted Genshin to portray since version 1, but it's being drowned out by the music videos, over-the-top design aspects, and myriad of things that look egregiously out of place. Over-the-top characters went from a stylistic choice to the central theme of Genshin Impact, which ironically had the inverse effect of causing the game to lose its theme. Other games get to get away with these over-the-top things because they were portrayed a lot more loosely from the start. For example, ZZZ obviously has a lot less constraints on what can be expected from their characters because the entire setting and background of the game is extraordinary to begin with. Bernice being a walking acid trip can exist in the same plane as Miyabi having to kill her own mom against her will, since in the same universe we have a talking bear named Ben and a shark girl who goes to high school. They said to hell with it from the very get-go. Genshin, on the other hand, had very tight constraints. Every character from Mostan had a distinct theme and style to them to fit the culture of Germany. Liyue characters all look like people from ancient China. Inazuma characters from old Japan. Cultures and everything were important as well, not just naming. They stretched things a bit with Sumeru's Akasha terminal being the internet and Fontaine's mechs, but Hoyo made an effort to integrate them into the lore and culture of the respective regions. Farina can be a showboating jester who treats everything like it's a dramatic play, because the centerpiece of Fontaine's an opera house doubling as a judicial court of law, and its citizens treat criminal trials like operas. Natlan is the only region where I feel like such care has not been given to making it make sense. This is a nation of dragons, dinosaurs, prehistoric birds, volcanoes, tribalism, and yet the characters we get to represent the region ride roller skates, flying pillows, motorcycles, and look like they were plucked out of an isekai slice of life anime. It just doesn't mesh with what was previously established by Genshin Impact, the fact that such advanced and sophisticated technology can exist right next to freaking dinosaurs. And before you go, actually Mavuika's bike is its old ancient technology. No, Shilonen literally mentions in flavor text that in other worlds Mavuika would need a driver's license to ride that vehicle. Designs can be flamboyant and cute and bubbly, but they have to make sense. There's only so much artistic licensing can do for you. Outside of a thematic sense, I think gameplay-wise, despite most if not all version 5 characters having been good so far, from my experience and a number of players I talked to, as well as comments from you guys, character movesets have also become more predicated on gimmicks than before. To be fair, all characters have a gimmick. You had Venti with a portable black hole for an ultimate, you had Nilou with the special bloom course, Vars being the animal one trick, Chan with the stance changes, Ito with the mono geo thing, so on and so forth. But despite the community's complaints about certain characters being abject failures, a potential good thing was that Hoyo was more concerned about experimenting with designs, even if they may have turned out weak or impractical, and less about trying to release a fancy character with more stuff than the previous fancy character. That sort of links up with the design gimmicks of Natlan's units. You had Shilonen riding on roller skates who can also shred, buff and heal everything. You had Chaska riding a flying gun who can do other forms of elemental damage. You had Mavuika riding a motorcycle who does big PP damage. Perhaps it's a result of the disconnect between the design surroundings, but the argument that Mavuika, for all the power she has, even being the strongest brute force attacker in the game, had the least impact in player perception than the perpetually broke old man or the hikikomori might be a point to how hollow the characters feel. They just feel like numbers and stats that get artificially inflated to drive up sales. Hoyo's always been fairly conservative about releasing broken characters, and whenever they did, it was usually for a reason, one that tied with the overall lore and theme of Genshin. Novelette and Farina being the two best characters of version 4 made a lot of sense when you think about how they're the Hydro Sovereign and Ex-Archon respectively. They're people in positions of power. Same with Arlecchina, who is similarly in a position of influence. It would make much less sense for a random like Femine or Charlotte to be godly 5 stars since it doesn't follow the script of Hoyo assigning power to characters based on significance. Not to say there aren't outliers, Yelan and Baichu never showed up in the US main story, and they're both top tiers. Emily literally came out of nowhere and she's also quite strong. But in Natlan, every character is strong, from Milani to Kanish to Shilonen to Chaska to Mavuika to Silali to Auroran. When it's this consistent, that too feels like Hoyo is trying to drive up the numbers for the sake of it. That was one of the biggest gripes I saw pertaining to Mavuika. Many were pointing out, myself included, that Mavuika's design felt like power for the sake of power. From a practical standpoint, she's incredible, one of the best attackers in the game and the absolute best point for point. But she just felt like another Pyro character, only inflated with numbers to make her stronger than Utal, Arlecchino, Yoimiya, Linny, and so on. She was a Pyro character, not the Pyro character. Same thing with Chaska, she felt like Wanderer with extra stuff. I see this especially in constellations. Anyone notice how every Natlan unit subtly tells you to get them to C1 or C2 to unlock their full extent? C2 Mavuika, Shilonen, and Chaska opens up so much more freedom in team composition and consistency that while they're perfectly fine at C0, it's like the game is telling you to spend more money to get the real Mavuika, the real Shilonen, the real Chaska. Before, constellations were usually quality of life adjustments that either make a character a tiny bit stronger or give them less energy requirements or something. Now, a character's power effectively doubles in the first two. Once again, other gacha games do this all the time where every new generation of units ends up being infinitely better versions of old ones, but Genshin marketed themselves as different from that. That's what made it stand out so much. Genshin was one of the most power creep resistant titles in the genre, notorious for power creeping its games. They didn't care about releasing OP character after OP character, they just released whatever they wanted to. I suppose much of this can be attributed to Genshin now being on year 5. Every gacha inevitably goes down this path due to there being only so many ways you can innovate before you have to eventually make stronger units. And again, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing on its own. But when you combine the game power creeping with the poor execution of Natlan and its units, that only adds on to characters feeling more like cash grabs marketed to be as appealing as possible and less about just making well-designed characters. All in all, I feel like Genshin Impact lost its direction with the game. New characters aren't as exciting or significant anymore no matter how strong Hoyo makes them, since there's no substance to them. Trailers and demos went from showcasing a character's attacks, maybe giving us a bit of backstory or detail to them, to full-blown music videos, comedies, or TV shows. Entertaining? Yeah, it was funny watching Mizuki's trailer, but ultimately superficial eye candy. That would be the best way I can describe how I feel about the current state of Genshin's characters. Superficial. What do you guys think? Do you agree or disagree with my stance? I'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. That's all for today, so if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Genshin discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.